So I want to set the record straight on crime rates because there's been a lot of lies and misinformation that I see floating around out there on all sides of the political spectrum regarding crime rates and overall crime trends. Now, one of the biggest lies I see commonly repeated is that crime is at an all-time high, and it's mostly conservatives who say this. Like, to be honest, at no point in my life have conservatives ever not been saying this. Like, they've been saying this constantly. Like, every year, they've always been saying crime's on the rise, crime is at an all-time high. And the statistics, at least here in North America, do not support that conclusion. If you look at homicide statistics in the United States and Canada, they actually tended to peak between the late 60s and the mid 90s. Those were actually the period when homicide in Canada and the US was at its all-time high. Now, regarding other crimes, it was often similar. Like for robbery and burglary, those have actually gone down over time, and they're lower now than they have been in many years. Now, granted, there are some crimes that are actually rising. Like, for instance, sexual assault is, according to the official statistics. However, that is largely due to the fact that sexual assault has been legally redefined thanks to the efforts of feminism to define sexual assault in a more broad sense, including many things that a lot of regular people wouldn't actually consider to be sexual assault. So that's the reason, at least part of the reason why it's increased so much, is that they've completely redefined it. So it's not really fair to compare earlier statistics on that to newer ones. And not only that, not only have they redefined it, but they've been aggressively encouraging women especially to report everything to the police, like anything that remotely resembles any kind of sexual indiscretion, like with, Me Too and all that. So really, I mean, I almost feel like that particular crime it's inadmissible, like to say that those statistics actually paint the picture of higher crime rates, because it's just been redefined so much, and there's been such a massive campaign to encourage reporting of like literally everything, even things that many people wouldn't consider things that should be crime, like even things that many people would think should not be considered a crime at all. And that is also the case in Europe with sexual assault rates, which is why I'm very skeptical of when people say, oh, look at in the UK and Sweden and all these countries, how it's at an all-time high, how it's increased so much. It's like, yeah, but they've gone through the same like Me Too trend as we have in North America. So, I mean, yes, it could be partly based on migrants committing actual acts of sexual assault, but it could also be at least partly for the same reasons as over here. And again, like, I mean, that's the thing. It's just, it makes the whole thing kind of invalid, like the statistic, because it's so inherently biased for that reason. But other than that, like, okay, like the one thing interestingly in Canada, of all the types of more major crimes, the only other one that has actually increased a lot lately, like relative to like 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago, like where it's just not just like a small blip, but like a major increase, is regular assault, like non-sexual assault, but only at level 2, because there's like 3 levels from most to least severe. And it's the in-between level of assault for some reason has increased a lot, but not the other 2. And I think that might actually be linked to like homeless people attacking random people, because you do hear a lot more about that these days, like homeless people attacking people in unprovoked attacks. Like I do know people who that has happened to. But at the same time, it's like, okay, that is increasing, but people being attacked for money is decreasing. Like robbery, mugging is actually decreasing. And nobody's talking about that. And yeah, I know people who were violently mugged back around 2005, 2006 in the suburb I grew up in the alleged good old days. Like, okay, I'm sure many boomers and Gen Xers would say those were not the good old days. But many millennials and Gen Zers would say, yes, those were the good old days. So that's what I'm saying. Like, obviously, there's a generational bias to what is considered the good old days. But I'm saying that, like, even back then, like, it was actually worse statistically in that regard. And okay, these trends are mirrored in Canada and the US with like burglary, robbery, and homicide um, reaching their high points decades ago. And now, homicide, there has been an increase in the past few years, like since 2020, although it seems to be leveling off a bit, but it's nowhere near the all time highs of the 70s, 80s, and early 90s. Whereas for robbery and burglary, those just keep going down. And again, nobody's talking about this. Like, personally, robbery and burglary are two of the crimes that I fear the most. Like, I've always feared those crimes more than almost any others based on a combination of severity and likelihood. Like, murder is obviously more severe, but it's less likely. Whereas, let's say, like if somebody steals your bike, if you just leave your bike lying around and somebody steals it, that's probably even more common than robbery or burglary, but that's less severe. So robbery and burglary are at that sweet spot of both severity but also frequency, where those are the two crimes that I'm most scared of happening to me. And yet they're actually both going down, at least in North America. Again, like, I'm talking in a North American context here because I haven't been able to find statistics for Europe over time. I've only been able to find like more recent statistics, but I haven't been able to find like many older statistics to compare them to. So it's hard to measure the long-term trends for Europe. I mean, so I really can't say whether crime overall is going up or down there. And I will link in the description to where I'm getting these statistics from for Canada and the US. Interestingly, okay, the other crime that's going up, okay, it's not recognized as its own category, but I saw an official Canadian government a Canadian government website say that actually shoplifting is going up, but theft overall is going down. So I guess shoplifting is going up, but other forms of theft are going down. Now, I could definitely see that. I could definitely see shoplifting going up. But theft overall is going down. Now, again, like, theft is different. There's robbery, burglary, and theft. Theft is when somebody steals something from you, but there's no force and it doesn't involve breaking into a place. Burglary is when it involves breaking into a place, like a building, like a residential or commercial building, and stealing stuff. Robbery is when somebody uses force or the threat of force to steal something from you, from your person directly. Like if they steal your wallet, your cell phone, whatever, like that would be robbery. Also, robbery is also known as mugging. So that's the difference between those three. All three of those crimes are going down overall in Canada and the US, but shoplifting, which is a specific type of theft, is going up. I guess it's not considered shoplifting if somebody burglarizes a store outside of opening hours. I guess that's just considered burglary and not shoplifting. I think shoplifting is specifically if you go into a store when it's open and you steal stuff. I could be wrong, but I think that's the definition. So, yeah, what the thing is, keep in mind also, even if crime is going down overall in North America, or in some cases plateaued, like it's not really going up or down, or it's like went slightly up, but then went down again. Like the only crimes, as I said, are really a consistent upward trajectory are sexual assault, in Canada, level 2 assault. I'm not sure about assault overall in the US. Okay, I need to look into that one. I don't know if, because they measure assault differently in the US. I'll have to get back on that one. But yeah, overall, it's really just shoplifting, sexual assault, and level 2 assault in Canada. Yeah. But granted, there are certain specific places where crime is indeed skyrocketing and going up, like Seattle, Portland, Denver, Salt Lake City, Albuquerque, Winnipeg. Like there are certain specific cities, Minneapolis, Yeah, there are certain specific cities where that are indeed experiencing an overall crime wave and where crime overall is going up. But again, it doesn't mean it's going up everywhere. There are some places where it's going down. There are some places where it's simply plateaued. There are places where it's just always been high, or at least not always, but like in recent living memory, like in the last few decades or half century or more than that. There's some places where it's consistently low. So it's like, again, like it's not rising everywhere and it's not at an all-time high in general or everywhere. Like it's not rising in general everywhere, like in an overall sense. But I will say that doesn't mean that it's not a problem because crime rates have been frankly intolerable for a while. Like in the United States, the overall crime rate, in my opinion, is very bad for a civilized society. Not only that, but um, in many other parts of the developed world too. Like I don't think we should be tolerating the current level of crime. I don't think it's okay. But when people say that it's at an all-time high or that it's just consistently rising in every regard, it's like that is simply not true. And people say, well, does it feel like crime is going up? Honestly, in some ways, yes. In some ways, no. Like, I mean, that's the thing. Some people, they will cite statistics when the statistics confirm their narrative. But then when the statistics go against their narrative, they'll just say, oh, well, statistics don't matter. What really matters is lived experience. What really matters is the vibe that you get. And honestly, the vibe I get is mixed. I feel like homelessness is definitely going up, and that is backed by statistics, and that drug addiction is going up. But I feel like certain other types of criminals are actually less prevalent than they used to be. Like I see fewer gangbangers than I used to. Like people, like young men with like do-rags, bandanas, saggy pants. I see less of that now than I saw 10 or 20 or 30 years ago. Like I see less of it now than I did back then. Like I think a lot of the young blacks are kind of like post gangsta. Like I see a lot of young black teenagers, they basically look like Miles Morales from the new Spider-Man. That's who they look like. Like they don't look like CJ from GTA San Andreas. They look more like Miles Morales. And that's the predominant look I see among young black guys these days. Like they don't look hood to the extent that they used to. They kind of just look like middle class presenting but with an afro. So kind of like still black, like they're not trying to look white or anything, but they're trying to look maybe black in a way that isn't overtly gangsta or hood. That's the predominant look I see among young black males, at least in Canada these days. To be honest, I see the gangsta look more among older ones, like among people my age, like in their 30s and 40s or whatever. But even that seems to be on the out somewhat in Canada and the US. I actually saw a lot more of it in Europe. It's like they didn't get the memo. Like in France, I see a lot of blacks, like it's still the 90s or the 2000s, with like the do-rags, the saggy pants, the bandanas, like the whole like GTA San Andreas type look. Like I see a lot more of that, like the NWA look. Like I see a lot more of that in Europe, in like France, for instance, than I do over here right now. Like over here, it seems kind of like post gangsta. That seems to be the vibe I get from young black and brown guys. Like they still listen to rap, but even the rap itself sounds a bit softer these days. Like like if you were to meet up in a dark alley with either Ice Cube, like the early 90s version of Ice Cube, like back when he was young, versus Kendrick Lamar, who would you be more scared to encounter in that dark alley? 90s era Ice Cube or Kendrick Lamar? I guarantee everybody would be more scared to encounter early 90s Ice Cube. So what I'm saying is, like, the rappers these days, like, they're not as scary as the rappers of yesteryear. And I'm sure some people will disagree. Some people will be like, oh, they're still tough, they're still hood. And it's like, I'm sure some of them are, but I'm saying, like, overall, I just get a general vibe that, like, the decline in testosterone rates is affecting blacks also. And frankly, that's a good thing because it's like that level of testosterone is fucking scary and incompatible with a civilized society. And I'm not trying to say black crime isn't still a problem. Like there still is a major difference in per capita crime rates between blacks and whites. But what's happening is for both races, it's going down overall. There's still a massive discrepancy, but it's going down for both. I think it's a slightly lower discrepancy than it used to be. Like it used to be maybe like, I don't know, the black crime rate was like 8 times as high per capita in the US, something like that. And nowadays it might be more like, I don't know, 6 times as high, 5 or 6, like 8 or 9 times as high versus 5 or 6 times. And again, it varies from crime to crime. Like interestingly, the crime, when I looked at different types of crime in the US, you can see this on the FBI website. One of the biggest discrepancies seemed to be for robbery specifically, like mugging. That seemed to be the most disproportionately black type of crime. And yet, that's one of the types of crime that has gone down the most. So what that means is it's still a very disproportionately black crime, but its overall robbery rates are going down. So that means there's still the same, more or less the same discrepancy. Or who knows, maybe the discrepancy was even bigger in the past, which is scary to even think. But it's just that robbery rates are going down overall in the US and in Canada too. Now, what does this mean? Like, what does it mean for society? I mean, I'm not saying there's no crime out there. Like, I've seen way more drug use in public. I've seen way more needles lying around in public. I saw some needles in the fucking forest in Toronto recently. I've never seen needles lying around in Toronto before. Like, and I saw somebody the same day shooting up in public. I've never seen that before in Toronto. So twice in one day, which I've never seen in Toronto before at all. And I've lived in Toronto. I've spent a lot of time in Toronto. So obviously, like, drug-related crimes seem to be on the rise. But other crimes are going down, like robbery and burglary, like I said. And yes, drug addicts do commit robberies and burglaries, but overall, robberies and burglaries seem to be going down. Perhaps it's because while drug addicts do it sometimes, it's the gangbangers who actually do that type of shit more, and that type of culture is in decline more. Like, if I had to guess, I would say that's probably the reason. I think the general reasons for crime declining in many ways has to do with a lot of factors. There's the lead crime hypothesis, which is that boomers in particular had a high crime rate because of a lot of exposure to lead, and that younger generations don't have as much lead exposure, so it's not messing up their brains as much and making them have criminal proclivities. So I think that's part of the reason. Declining testosterone rates across the board, I think that's a huge part of the reason. Improvements in forensics and in and surveillance, other types of police technology or policing methods, like that they've just learned over time how to be more effective at their jobs. Although I think some of the late, like, defund the police and some of the, like, stigma against being a police officer lately have kind of undermined that. Which is why, again, we've seen some fluctuations where it's like crime rates were going down, but in some ways are starting to more like plateau or starting to like kind of go a bit like up and down like a roller coaster a little bit. But overall, we're nowhere near record crime rates in most types of crime. I think another possible reason for crime rates going down is, as some pro-abortion people say, like there is probably some effect there where potential criminals are getting aborted. Now, again, like I'm not saying that necessarily like would morally justify abortion. Like I don't like it, I mean, if you think abortion's murder, then it doesn't matter if it decreases crime rates, it's still murder. But I'm saying, you could still call a spade a spade. There probably is some element of that that's happening. Again, abortion is an issue. I don't want to get into it too much because I find no matter what I say, I'm gonna piss people off. But I will say I'm not trying to say this from like a pro-abortion perspective. I'm not trying to say that this inherently justifies free abortion, like legalized elective abortion. I'm just saying that, yes, I do think there is some validity to this theory that it does decrease crime rates. There probably is some truth to that, like the eugenic aspects of it. But that being said, I think there's counter trends that are making crime go up also, even if it's not going up overall, that are making it go up more than it otherwise would. Like drug use is definitely increasing, and I think it's partly because we've become way more tolerant toward drug use. There's demographic trends. Like I think because of immigration, I feel like crime rates would be decreasing even more so if we didn't have all this immigration from countries that have high crime rates, like places in sub-Saharan Africa, the Caribbean, Latin America, parts of the world that generally have a high crime rate. Now, some immigrant groups are a bit mixed. Like it really depends. Like Middle Easterners and North Africans, I find vary a lot in crime rate. Like in Canada, from what I've seen of the statistics for homicide, they have homicide statistics for them. It's actually pretty close to whites from what I've calculated. Whereas in Europe, from what people are saying there, and from the vibes I get there, like I see a lot more sketchy looking Middle Eastern people. It's really crazy how different Middle Eastern people are in Europe versus here in North America. Like in North America, they generally don't seem that sketchy. They seem kind of like Italians. Like they kind of give off like this like Gino vibe, the Guido vibe a lot of the time. Like they don't seem like they're like really like actual gangbangers, but they seem more like the kinds of guys who like they want to drive their BMW and hit up the club or whatever. Whereas in Europe, a lot of them do give off very serious, like threatening vibes, like just young men kind of like milling about, doing nothing, standing around looking intimidating. There's a lot of young Middle Eastern men that I've seen like that in Europe, like Middle Eastern or North African. So it's very interesting, like the difference in that particular group between Europe and North America. And it's reflected in their outcomes too. Like I'm pretty sure their per capita income, per capita wealth would reflect that as well. So I don't know, maybe we're getting the cream of the crop. They're not. Maybe they're sending their best over here and not to Europe. I don't know. It definitely probably has a lot to do with geographical proximity and who's coming and through what means. Like, are they refugees or are they people who came through the points system? Like, I think that's a big part of it. But yeah, I digress. I mean, my point is overall, yeah, I mean, crime could be potentially decreasing even more if our immigration policy was different or if our drug policy was different. We could be seeing extremely low crime rates if that was the case. We could be seeing far lower than they currently are. Absolutely. But I think a lot of this does tie into this conservative impulse to romanticize the so-called good old days, to act like everything was great then, like back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, whatever. Like, to act like, oh, crime was lower then, even if it actually wasn't. And yeah, they'll say things like, oh, crime was more localized then. And it's like, maybe that's true. It's still localized now. Like, there's still definitely major geographic disparities. I guess what might be true is back then that there was more of a distinct urban versus suburban divide, like in the film 8 Mile, like the division between Detroit and the suburbs. Like these days, it's like many of the neighborhoods north of 8 Mile in the suburbs are fairly crime-ridden also, and also fairly black. It's not this firm line in the sand like it used to be. But, well, there's more of the like blacks going north of 8 Mile rather than whites going south of 8 Mile like Eminem. There's it's very much in one direction. Although I think actually in the latest census, the white population in Detroit as a percentage actually increased for the first time in many decades. But again, it's not as big a trend as blacks moving northward into the inner ring Detroit suburbs. But my point is, okay, there is maybe less of a firm like urban versus suburban distinction in that regard. And I think that's what a lot of these people long for. This idea like that being in the suburbs inherently meant, oh, you're in a safe neighborhood, a white neighborhood, whatever. But it's like, I mean, and that wasn't 100% true back then because you had like Compton. I mean, that started out as basically a post-war suburb, and even in like the 80s, that was going to shit. But I mean, my point is, I think that's part of it is that they long for that like suburban American dream, and that these days it still exists, but it's like you have to go further out like into the exurbs, and there's less of a guarantee that like just because you're in a low density suburb it will have a low crime rate. Although some people still act like there is that guarantee, and it's like no, there isn't. Like that is true. Like the prevalence of like sketchiness in low density suburbs has definitely increased, even if the crime rate has decreased in many ways overall. I will concede that. Like that's definitely true from what I've seen. But at the same time, it's like, okay, so what you're saying is you long for a day when the inner city was even shittier than it is now. You long for a day when like our historic neighborhoods in cities like New York, Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, Boston, Baltimore, New Orleans, Charleston, Savannah, Chicago, San Francisco, Montreal, Toronto, Ottawa, whatever. Like when like the historic parts of these cities were actually worse than they are today. You're basically saying you don't give a shit about our historic cities. Like, and that's where I disagree with these people strongly. Like I think the more historic parts of our cities are much more culturally important to us than these sprawling generic cookie cutter suburbs. They're the places where our museums are, where our best architecture is, where the heart and soul of our culture is, where our best restaurants often are. Like, I mean, honestly, no, I don't accept the idea that those were the good old days, because in many ways in these places they were actually worse than now, and people who live there can attest to that. I mean, my dad spent some time living in Chicago and Baltimore during those decades, and there were major problems there. There were race riots. Black people would warn him, be like, yo, what are you doing here right now? Get out of here, honky. You in the wrong neighborhood, fool. You know, they'd actually do this, like, not even out of hostility, but out of, like, trying to help him. Be like, yo, you shouldn't be here. You shouldn't be here right now, man. You know, like, they'd be trying to help him. But yeah, that's my point. Is like those weren't the good old days in that regard, nor overall when looking at overall crime rates. Were things better in some regards? Absolutely yes. Like I do think overall society is getting worse. Like when you look at demographics, culture, obesity, drug use, climate change, forest fires, even the ability to travel places like as a tourist, to go to other countries or to go to specific attractions or whatever. When you look at like overpopulation, overcrowding, scarcity of resources, I think in most regards, yes, society is getting worse overall. It's only getting worse, but I think in terms of crime rates specifically, I don't think this is one of the aspects where in general things are getting worse. Like I think overall, statistically speaking, in North America, crime rates are not going up. Not in a general long-term trend. Not in most crimes. In some crimes, yes, but overall with most crimes, no, it's not going up overall. In Europe, it might be a different story. Again, I can't really find statistics over time there to compare from one year to the next or one decade to the next. So I can't say for sure, nor for Australia or New Zealand. I don't know. But I will say in a Canadian or American context, I don't think the narrative is true that crime is at an all-time high or that it's generally speaking going up. It's the statistics do not show that, and furthermore, okay, even if you want to deny that the statistics are accurate, be like, oh, there's all this unreported crime, fair enough, you could argue that that's kind of like unfalsifiable, but at the same time it's like, if you're going by my personal experience, honestly, no, I encountered more sketchy shit. I knew more people who had sketchy shit happen to them, and I personally had more sketchy shit happen to me in like the 2000s and like I guess the early 2010s compared to more recently. Like being totally honest, that's my personal experience. The only thing, like, I do see more people using drugs in public now, but I've never actually had any of those people do anything to me. Whereas, okay, like thinking back, okay, like, I mean, I've never been mugged, but I've had shit stolen from me. Car tires slashed and deflated, gas siphoned from the car. Um, I never had my cell phone stolen, but I mean, I've had like I've had stuff stolen. I just haven't been robbed because robbery involves force or the threat of force, and I've never had that happen. But yeah, most of the times that things like that happen to me, most of it was in the 2000s or the early to mid 2010s. Like maybe you could say it's because I've gotten smarter over time, and there's probably some truth to that. But I mean, even with people I knew, like a lot of people I knew like several people I knew got violently robbed in the city where I grew up, the suburb where I grew up in the mid 2000s by gangs of mostly black men. Like it was apparently like mostly black guys and like a few guys of other backgrounds, but mostly black. Um, but yeah, this happened in the 2000s in the suburbs of Toronto. And it seemed to be a regular occurrence, or at least semi regular in certain specific areas. So, yeah, I mean, honestly, it just wasn't the good old days in terms of crime from my perspective. So, yeah, I'm sorry, my personal experience doesn't line up with the narrative that like, oh, crime in general is skyrocketing. It's on the rise in general. Like it doesn't mesh with that. Like certain types definitely are. Like just homelessness and like drug use. But overall, no, it doesn't necessarily feel that way. Cause like gangbanger crime feels like it's going down. And honestly, gangbangers scare me more than homeless people if I have to choose between one group or the other. Um, the homeless are often kind of so out of it that like they may not even register my existence. But gangbangers, on the other hand, you gotta watch out for those guys. So yeah, I'll link in the description where you can find the Canadian and American statistics to show that I'm not just talking smack, that this is backed up statistically. But yeah, those are my overall thoughts on this issue.